Some time ago, popular atheist YouTuber Mindshift made a video called A Troll Lying About Truth, Christians Don't Own Truth. In that video, Mindshift responded to some comments he received. I'm going to be responding to each of the things that Mindshift said in his video in a multiple-part series.
I know better than to feed the trolls. And in fact, going into my 4th year of making Mindshift videos, one of my changes that I've set out for myself is to engage with trolls way less. And I might get that wrong sometimes, but generally it's pretty easy to tell if someone is acting in good faith or not. However, this one troll today is about to get fed a little bit as a byproduct of me speaking about the subject matter they brought up, which is really good subject matter to think about and discuss when you are in the process of deconstruction or deconversion. So this is what Joey Arrogance had to say on my video about truth last week. Well, what on earth do we have here? Brandon is coming out saying that as an atheist, he believes that truth matters. Well, let's put this to the test. Below are statements about truth and atheism, and I invite any atheist to prove any of them wrong. Who now is going to come out and swing a big pair of balls at me and refute my statements? Is there any atheist who will take up my challenge, or do I declare victory now? And then he lists these 10 statements, and that's what we're going to go through. Now, I already put up a really quick reply for anyone that was reading the comments so they could have a counterpoint here, but I want to discuss it a little bit further with you now. His first point is that atheists cannot define truth, but we can. He may not agree with it, he may not like it, but to say that we cannot is silly. Now, if we want to take all of this to the next philosophical level as we talk about truth, and we want to say that the only truth has to be objective truth, and can we really ever know what objective truth is? Aren't there things we've thought represented reality better until we found out more later, and then we backtracked, which means maybe we shouldn't be so quick to declare other things. And I am all for all of that thinking. We've all seen incredibly sharp minds debate on the very concept of what is truth and get nowhere. Just because Christians have a simplified assertion of an answer, that it's their God or what their God says or what their God declares or what their holy scriptures speak of, does not all of a sudden mean that they own the concept of truth. I can define truth like many other people have defined truth, and I think it's a really good working definition. It is that which comports to reality best. Not perfectly, because reality is something we're still discovering. There's so many parts of reality, and there's many things we can't know. We either don't have the technology yet, or we don't have the experience yet, or possibly our brains just aren't wired to be able to do so. But here's where you're going to continue to see the difference between someone who poses these kinds of statements and thinks they have it all figured out because they have a little book and they have a God in the sky, and someone like myself. And it comes down to being okay with acknowledging the limitations you have. You see, the believer who is staunch like that cannot acknowledge any limitations. If they believe Jesus is the truth, then Jesus is the truth, and anything short of that is blasphemy. Now, I can think a lot of things are truth and find out that I'm wrong, but it's in the search for more accurate truth, a truth that isn't being debunked or falsified in some way. And what I want this to be for a lot of people in the in-between deconstructing and deconverting is an allowance, a permission that you don't have to have answers you used to pretend to have just to counteract the claims made in your former life. But Christians will love to tell you you have to. Oh, you don't believe in God anymore? Well, what about truth? What about meaning? What about purpose? What about morality? And when you're honest and you are trying to take time to figure out what you think about those things in a godless world, they say, ha, see? Like it's some kind of an answer, like it means anything. All it means is you are not willing to jump to dishonesty from a place of comfort. And that's what's so funny about getting this comment on that last video, when my first point of 3 was that truth is more important than comfort. Because when we sacrifice, when we reverse that order and we say, you know what, this particular claim of truth makes me feel better, so I'll just say that's the truth or continue to believe that's the truth, especially despite other evidence against it, that's not good. That's what I'm saying. And I've done work in other episodes to show why that's not good and what it leads to. That's not the point here. Not to be that guy that says Merriam-Webster defines truth, but again, we can make descriptions and definitions here. Truth is the body of real things, events, and facts. I'm fine with that. But there are times that we can't know those things, in which case we don't know the truth. It doesn't mean we can't define what truth is. That's such a stupid, unnecessary limiter to try to make your point about your God. Let's move on.
In response to mind shift, I'd like to say that atheists and theists have different worldviews. Atheists like to call their atheism simply a lack of belief in God. I believe it should also be called a worldview. Atheists like to balk at the theists, calling their atheism a worldview. But the reality is that if a worldview simply gives us the lenses through which we interpret the world around us, then both the theists have a worldview and the atheists have a worldview. Brandon's worldview, his atheism, leads him to perceiving what he has described about what truth is. My worldview, my theism, leads me to perceive the world and truth differently than Brandon perceives the world and truth. Brandon alluded to there being different types of truth. For the theist, objective truth is true no matter what. Objective truths cannot change. We may not have discovered them yet, but just because we have not yet discovered them does not mean that they do not exist or are not true. There are things that are true that each of us do not yet know and may never know are true. Those things that people call truth and later backtrack on sometimes should not be backtracked on. Sometimes they should be backtracked on. Sometimes people don't want to think about the implications of something being true and therefore refuse to continue to believe something or to start believing something, despite the evidence for its truth. Some people don't want to believe that God exists because of what it means for their life, how their life would have to change if they were to live as though God did exist. Science does not say anything. Scientists say things. Scientists, like it or not, are human. Humans have worldviews. Worldviews affect how we interpret facts and data. Neither the theist nor the atheist will ever have all the facts to ever be able to prove that God does or does not exist. Both the atheist position and the theist position requires faith. The atheist knows this, and many of them who know this demand absolute proof, knowing full well that the theist will never be able to provide absolute proof, just like the atheist will ever be able to provide absolute proof that God does not exist. The theist's inability to prove irrefutable proof to the atheist of God's existence gives some atheists the excuse they need to rationalize their persistence in their atheism. The atheist often conflates absolute proof with evidence, and erroneously claims that because there's no absolute proof that God exists, that there is no evidence that God exists. This is an error that atheists regularly make. There are many things that we will never know or experience, no matter how advanced our technology becomes, because some things are outside the material world as we know it, or otherwise outside of the possibility of discovery. Love, while it can be explained using some materialistic language, is an example of one thing that forever will be and forever is immaterial. Hate is another example of something that is immaterial. Nobody can measure a molecule of hate, or a molecule of love, or a molecule of beauty. These things are beyond the capacity of what science could ever tell us. Yet we all experience it. Brandon seems to inherently assume, like many atheists assume, that science can tell us everything. That's how many atheists talk. I want now to play an old clip of William Lane Craig listing several things that science cannot explain.
But do you deny that science cannot account for everything?
Yes, I do deny that science.
So what can't it account for?
Well, had you brought that up in the debate, I had a number of examples that I was going to give. I think there are a good number of things that cannot be scientifically proven, but that we're all rational to accept. Let me list 5. Logical and mathematical truths cannot be proven by science. Science presupposes logic and math, so that to try to prove them by science would be arguing in a circle. Metaphysical truths like there are other minds other than my own, or that the external world is real, or that the past was not created 5 minutes ago with an appearance of age, are rational beliefs that cannot be scientifically proven. Ethical beliefs about statements of value are not accessible by the scientific method. You can't show by science whether the Nazi scientists in the camps did anything evil as opposed to the scientists in Western democracies. Aesthetic judgments, number 4, cannot be accessed by the scientific method because the beautiful, like the good, cannot be scientifically proven. And finally, most remarkably, would be science itself. Science cannot be justified by the scientific method. Science is permeated with unprovable assumptions. For example, in the special theory of relativity, the whole theory hinges on the assumption that the speed of light is constant in a one-way direction between any 2 points A and B. But that strictly cannot be proven. We simply have to assume that in order to hold to the theory.
But you're missing the whole...
So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So we are, none of these beliefs can be scientifically proven, and yet they are accepted by all of us. And we're
I want to say that Brandon represents the Christian position pretty well. Materialist atheists who limit reality to solely that which can be experienced in the material world will miss out on a lot because of what they reject a priori. I don't think Brandon's right to say that theists are not okay with acknowledging their limitations. I don't think Brandon's right that Christians think you have to have all the answers. I think there will always be gaps in knowledge that neither faith nor science will ever be able to completely fill. I think theists should understand, like Brandon understands, that scientists do a good job of explaining a whole lot about the world. But it does not take much faith to understand that as much as scientists have taught us in the last 150 years, they'll never know everything, just like the theists. Some atheists like to put science in the gaps of their understanding, just like they accuse the theists of putting God in the gaps of their understanding. They do this when they say things like, just because we don't know something now doesn't mean that science will not figure it out. While I'm sure it's possible for some Christians or theists to insert God into the gaps of their knowledge, as I've demonstrated in other videos in this channel, monotheists, specifically Christians, can make a reasonable case that we don't have to appeal to the God of the gaps, but can appeal to a God as a super intellect or as an ultimate superior mind behind things because of what we do know, and not have to use God as a crutch, as a guess about what we do not know. Though it may make some atheists uncomfortable and squirm in their seats, sometimes an infinite intelligence better explains some facts than does blind, unguided chance.
I see the evidence of your goodness.